In the company parking lot, laughter echoed when CEO Serena Whitmore pointed at the janitor's rusty old car. "Does it even start?" she joked, as employees smirked. But the janitor, Henry Dalton, only smiled quietly, turning the ignition. The engine roared, not like an old wreck, but like something reborn. What no one knew was that the sound they heard wasn't just power, it was history. Inside that engine lay a forgotten patent, one that could change the world, and Henry's life forever. Serena Whitmore was 34 years old, and she wore her success like armor. As the CEO of Whitmore Motors, one of Detroit's most prestigious automotive corporations, she commanded attention wherever she went. Today, she wore a crimson dress with a sharp V-neck, her golden hair falling in perfect waves past her shoulders. Everything about her screamed power, ambition, control. She believed deeply that class was reflected in appearance, that worth could be measured in material possessions, in the shine of chrome and the purr of expensive engines. Every Friday, Serena hosted what she called Show-Off Friday, a ritual where employees parked their newest vehicles in the front lot, competing for her approval and admiration. It was theater, really. A performance where she played both judge and audience, her laughter ringing out across the asphalt as she praised the sleek sedans and luxury SUVs her executives drove. She loved the attention, the cameras, the way journalists documented her every move. To her, success was visibility, but there was one car she never praised. One vehicle that made her lip curl in disgust every time she saw it rumbling into the back lot. Far from the polished displays of her Friday spectacle, Henry Dalton was 36, though the weight in his eyes made him seem older. Tall and lean, with a kind face and hands that carried the memory of 1,000 careful repairs, he arrived each morning in a 1968 Plymouth Barracuda. The car was a relic, rust spread across its hood like a disease. The paint had faded to a dull, uneven copper. The passenger door didn't quite close right. To anyone watching, it looked like a vehicle that should have been scrapped decades ago. Henry worked as a janitor at Whitmore Motors. He mopped floors, emptied trash bins, wiped down windows in the executive suites. He was invisible to most people, a shadow moving quietly through hallways and conference rooms. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never offered opinions during meetings he overheard while cleaning. He simply existed in the margins of the company, unnoticed and unremarkable. But Henry Dalton had not always been a janitor. Once, he had been a brilliant aerospace engineer at NASA, a man whose name appeared on patents that helped satellites navigate the darkness of space. Once, he had stood beside his wife, a chemical engineer named Sarah, and together they had dreamed of revolutionizing energy. They called their project the Phoenix Engine, a regenerative power system that could recycle its own energy output, creating a near-perpetual cycle of motion. It was genius. It was impossible, and it was real. Then, Sarah got sick. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. Henry left NASA to care for her, pouring every dollar into treatments that bought them time, but not miracles. When she died, she took a piece of him with her. The patents they'd filed together were stolen by a larger corporation, buried under legal maneuvers. Henry couldn't afford to fight. Broken and grieving, he disappeared. He took a job that required nothing of his mind, nothing of his heart. He became a janitor. And the world forgot Henry Dalton, the engineer, ever existed. But he kept the prototype. Hidden inside the rusted shell of his Barracuda, beneath the cracked leather seats and behind a carefully modified firewall, was the Phoenix engine, the original, the one Sarah had helped him build in their garage, late at night, her laughter mixing with the smell of welding torches and motor oil. He drove it every day. Not because it was valuable, but because it was all he had left of her. Every turn of the key was a prayer. Every mile was a memory. Whitmore Motors was racing toward a massive contract, a government deal worth billions for the development of an eco-engine, a high-performance system that could run cleaner and longer than anything currently on the market. Serena's team had been working around the clock, engineers arguing over schematics in glass-walled conference rooms, while Henry emptied their coffee cups and vacuumed their floors. He listened sometimes, unable to help himself, and he recognized the problems they were facing. He knew the solutions, but he said nothing. He was just the janitor. The contrast between them was absolute. Serena lived in a penthouse overlooking the Detroit River, threw parties that made headlines, and drove a different luxury car each week. Henry lived in a small apartment above a hardware store, ate simple meals, and spent his evenings in a rented garage bay, maintaining the Barracuda. She saw people as assets or obstacles. He saw them as ghosts he no longer had the energy to engage. She believed worth was demonstrated. He believed it was inherent, and neither of them understood the other at all. The day everything changed started like any other. Serena had organized a special event, a demonstration for investors and government officials who had flown in to see Whitmore Motors' new prototype vehicle. The presentation was elaborate. A stage had been set up in the main showroom. Cameras positioned to capture every angle. Champagne flutes arranged on silver trays. Serena stood at the center of it all, radiant and confident, her red dress catching the light as she gestured toward the gleaming concept car behind her. "This," she announced, her voice carrying across the room, "is the future." The investors applauded. Cameras flashed. And then came the moment of truth. The lead engineer, a nervous man named Davidson, climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, but the engine didn't respond. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Davidson's face went pale. He tried a third time, then a fourth, his hands shaking. Still nothing. The prototype, the vehicle that represented months of work and millions of dollars, sat silent and dead on the stage. Serena's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. She could feel the moment slipping away, could sense the investors' doubt spreading like poison through the room. She turned to Davidson, her voice low and sharp. "Fix it. Now." "I don't know what's wrong," Davidson whispered back, panic obvious in his tone. The diagnostics were perfect this morning. Behind the crowd, near the back wall, Henry Dalton was on his knees, wiping down the baseboards. He heard everything. He saw the sweat on Davidson's forehead, saw Serena's carefully controlled fury, saw the investors beginning to exchange skeptical glances. He knew what was wrong with the car. The energy flow regulator had been installed backward, reversing the polarity of the regenerative circuit. A simple mistake, but fatal to the system. It would take someone 5 minutes to fix if they knew what they were looking for. He stayed quiet. It wasn't his place. He was just the janitor. But Serena's eyes found him. Desperation, maybe, or simply the need to deflect attention from the disaster unfolding on stage, made her call out to him. "You," she said, her voice carrying across the showroom. "The janitor. You're always hanging around the garage. Think you can make this work?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. A few investors chuckled. Someone muttered something about trying anything at this point. Serena's smile was mocking, cruel. "If you can make it start," she added, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll give you a whole $1 raise." More laughter. Henry looked up, meeting her eyes. For a moment, he considered walking away. But then he thought of Sarah, of the nights they'd spent solving impossible problems together, and he stood. He crossed the showroom floor in silence, every eye on him. He didn't look at Serena, didn't acknowledge the smirks and whispers. He opened the hood of the prototype, studied the engine for perhaps 30 seconds, then reached in and made a single adjustment. He reversed the polarity connector, checked the circuit breaker, and tightened a loose ground wire. Then he walked to the driver's door, leaned in, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. Not just started, but sang. The sound was smooth and powerful, a perfect harmonic that filled the showroom like music. The dashboard lit up, every system showing green. The crowd fell silent, stunned. Henry stepped back, closed the hood, and returned to his bucket and rag without a word. He knelt down and resumed, wiping the baseboards. As if nothing had happened, Serena stood frozen, her smile locked in place. But her mind was racing. That sound. That perfect, impossible sound. She'd heard hundreds of engines in her life, had test-driven prototypes and luxury vehicles and racing machines, but she'd never heard anything like that. It was more than mechanical efficiency. It was art. The demonstration continued. The investors were impressed. Orders were discussed. But Serena couldn't focus. Her eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, to the man in the gray coveralls scrubbing floors. And later, when the guests had left and the showroom had emptied, she stood at the window and watched him walk across the parking lot to his rusted Barracuda. He climbed in, turned the key, and the engine that started sounded exactly like the prototype. Exactly. The same harmonic, the same impossible smoothness. Serena's blood went cold. She couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, alone in her penthouse, she replayed the sound over and over in her mind. It haunted her. The next morning, she summoned her assistant Leo, a sharp young man who handled the details she didn't want to be bothered with. "I need you to pull Henry Dalton's file," she said, not looking up from her desk. "Everything. Background, references, previous employment. I want to know who he is." Leo returned an hour later with a thin folder. "Not much here," he admitted. "He's been with us 3 years. Before that, his employment history is pretty sparse. Some odd jobs, nothing remarkable. No red flags, though. He's reliable, quiet, never caused any problems." Serena frowned. It didn't add up. "Check the security footage," she said. "I want to see what he does after hours." Leo hesitated. "That's a bit invasive, don't you think? Just do it." 2 days later, Leo showed her the recordings. The footage was grainy, shot from the parking lot security cameras, but it was clear enough. Several nights a week, after everyone else had gone home, Henry stayed late. He didn't go to the building. Instead, he went to his car, opened the hood, and worked. For hours. Adjusting, testing, making small modifications to the engine. Serena watched the videos with growing obsession. In one clip, she could see him removing panels from the engine bay, revealing a complex system underneath. In another, he was connecting diagnostic equipment, studying readouts on a small handheld device. This wasn't casual maintenance. This was engineering. "Get me a closer angle," she demanded. Leo managed to pull footage from a different camera, one mounted near the garage entrance. The zoom wasn't great, but it was enough. Serena watched as Henry connected a power cell to the engine, then disconnected the fuel line entirely. The engine ran anyway. It ran on its own recycled energy, pulling power from somewhere inside itself, sustaining motion without external input. "That's impossible," Leo whispered. Serena didn't respond. She was already planning. The next Friday, she organized a company party, a celebration of the successful investor presentation. The executive team gathered in the main conference room, champagne flowing, congratulations exchanged. And in the middle of it all, Serena unveiled her surprise. On a large screen, she played the security footage of Henry working on his car. "This," she announced, her voice dripping with mockery, "is what our janitor does for fun." The room erupted in laughter. Executives pointed at the screen, making jokes about the rusty car, about Henry's stained coveralls, about the absurdity of a janitor thinking he was an engineer. Serena smiled, soaking in the validation, the shared superiority. But then one of the older engineers, a man named Marcus who'd been with the company for 20 years, stood up. He moved closer to the screen, studying the footage with a frown. "Stop," he said quietly. "Rewind that." Serena paused the video. Marcus pointed at the engine on the screen. "That design," he said slowly. "I've seen it before." "It's just a junk engine from a junk car," Serena said dismissively. "No." Marcus shook his head. "Those aren't standard components. That's a regenerative loop system. And those markings on the casing, those initials, H.D. The room went quiet. 20 years ago, Marcus continued, I attended a symposium at NASA. There was a presentation on sustainable energy systems. The lead researcher was a young engineer named Henry Dalton. He had a prototype called the Phoenix engine. It could regenerate its own power output, creating a near-perpetual energy cycle. It was revolutionary. And then, he just disappeared. The project died with him. Marcus turned to look at Serena. If that's the same man, and that's the same engine, you're not looking at a janitor. You're looking at the most valuable piece of technology in the automotive industry. Serena felt the floor shift beneath her. The laughter died. The mockery turned to stunned silence. And in that moment, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Serena called Henry into her office. She'd prepared carefully, practicing her approach. She needed that engine, needed the technology, needed to own whatever he'd built. But she also needed him to cooperate, which meant she couldn't appear desperate. Henry entered quietly, still wearing his coveralls. He didn't sit until she gestured to a chair. "I've been thinking about your car," Serena began, her tone carefully casual. "It's an interesting piece. Vintage. I imagine it has sentimental value." "It does," Henry replied simply. "I'd like to buy it from you." She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "Name your price. I collect classic cars. It would be well cared for. It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Henry. We both know that." Her smile was sharp. $20,000. Cash. That's more than the car's worth by any measure. "No." "50,000. "No." Serena's patience snapped. She stood, her voice rising. "A janitor can't own something that valuable. You don't even understand what you have. That engine. That technology. It belongs in the hands of people who can actually do something with it. People like me." Henry stood as well, his voice calm. "People like you already tried to take it once. That's why I left the industry. That's why I'm a janitor now. Because people like you can't be trusted with things you didn't build. Get out," Serena hissed. Henry turned and walked to the door. But before he left, he looked back. "You really have no idea what you're looking at, do you? You see an engine and think it's about money. You're just like the corporation that stole my patents 15 years ago. You're just like the people who killed my wife's dream." The door closed behind him. The next morning, Serena fired him. She had security escort him from the building, had his access badge deactivated, had his final paycheck cut and mailed. She told herself it was the right move, that he was insubordinate, that he'd been disrespectful. But deep down, she knew the truth. She'd fired him because she was furious that he wouldn't give her what she wanted. But firing Henry didn't give her access to the engine, and Serena couldn't let it go. She hired a team of engineers, sworn to secrecy, and tasked them with replicating what they'd seen in the security footage. She provided them with every angle, every frame of video, every measurement they could extract from the grainy images. They worked for 2 weeks, building their best approximation of Henry's design. It didn't work. The engine turned over, but couldn't sustain itself. The energy loop collapsed after 30 seconds, the system overheating and shutting down. They tried again and again. Each attempt failed. Finally, the lead engineer, a woman named Dr. Reeves, came to Serena's office looking exhausted. "We can't do it," she admitted. "The design is too advanced. There are components here we don't even recognize, materials we can't identify from video alone. Whoever built this understood regenerative thermodynamics at a level we're still decades away from achieving." "Then find him," Serena snapped. "Bring him back. Make him explain it. We've tried. He's gone. His apartment is cleared out. No forwarding address. It's like he vanished." Serena felt panic clawing at her chest. She'd had the answer in her hands, and she'd thrown it away out of pride. 2 weeks later, the news broke. A small startup company called Phoenix Dynamics had secured a federal research grant worth $12 million for the development of clean energy vehicle propulsion systems. The founder and chief technology officer was listed as Henry Dalton, formerly of NASA. The automotive industry exploded with speculation. Journalists dug into Henry's history, uncovering his past achievements, his stolen patents, his years in obscurity. And slowly, piece by piece, they uncovered the connection to Whitmore Motors. A reporter named Angela Torres published an exposé detailing how a corporation that would later become Whitmore Motors had stolen intellectual property from a young engineer named Henry Dalton 15 years earlier. The patents had been buried, the technology shelved, and Henry had been left with nothing. The article included testimony from former employees, legal documents, and a statement from Henry himself. "I didn't come back for revenge," he was quoted saying. "I came back because my wife believed this technology could help people, and I won't let it be buried again." The public response was immediate and fierce. Social media erupted. Investors began asking questions. Board members demanded meetings. And in the center of it all, Serena Whitmore stood alone, watching her empire crack, because the article had mentioned one more detail. The corporation that had stolen Henry's work 15 years ago had been run by a man named Charles Whitmore, Serena's father. She found the files in her father's old office, hidden in a cabinet she'd never bothered to open. Legal documents, patent applications, and a handwritten note in her father's script, acquired Dalton Thermal Regeneration System. Paid off attorneys. Phoenix project terminated. Cost us $200,000 in legal fees, but worth millions. Her father had stolen Henry's life's work, had destroyed his career, had contributed to the death of his dream and, indirectly, to the loss of his wife. And Serena had inherited that sin without even knowing it. She sat in the dark office for hours, the weight of the revelation crushing her. She'd spent her entire life building on a foundation of theft. Every success, every achievement, every moment of pride was tainted by her father's cruelty. And when she'd had the chance to make it right, she'd repeated his mistakes. She'd mocked Henry, fired him, tried to steal from him again. The next morning, Serena got in her car and drove. She didn't tell Leo where she was going. She didn't inform the board. She just drove, following an address she'd pulled from a news article, until she reached a small industrial building on the outskirts of Detroit. The sign on the door read Phoenix Dynamics in simple black letters. She parked and walked inside. The space was modest. A workshop, really, with concrete floors and high ceilings. Engine parts lay scattered across workbenches. Diagnostic equipment hummed in the corners. And, in the center of it all, Henry Dalton stood beside his Barracuda, hood open, hands deep in the engine bay. He looked up when she entered. His expression didn't change. "I'm sorry," Serena said. The words felt inadequate, hollow, but they were all she had. Henry straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "For what?" "Exactly. For mocking you. For firing you. For trying to steal what you built." She took a breath. "For what my father did to you." "You didn't know about that," Henry said quietly. "No. But that doesn't make it right. And when I found out, I should have come to you immediately. Instead, I tried to cover it up. I tried to replicate your work. Without your permission. I was just like him." Henry was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to a small table and poured 2 cups of coffee from a dented metal pot. He handed one to Serena. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I want to make it right," Serena said. "I know I can't undo what happened. I can't bring your wife back. I can't give you the 15 years you lost. But I want to try to fix what I can. You can't buy redemption, Serena. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to earn it." Henry studied her face, searching for sincerity. "How?" "Let me help you," she said. "Not as a CEO, not as a buyer, but as someone who wants to make sure your technology reaches the people who need it. I have resources, connections, experience in manufacturing and distribution. You have the genius. Together, we could actually change things. And what do you get out of it?" "Nothing," Serena admitted. "Or everything. I don't know. I just know that I can't keep living the way I've been living. Building on a lie. Stepping on people to stay on top. I'm tired, Henry. I'm tired of being the villain." Henry set down his coffee cup. He walked to a side room and returned carrying a thick binder. Its pages, yellowed with age. He dropped it on the workbench between them. "These are the original design specifications for the Phoenix engine," he said. "Written by hand. By me and my wife. If you can build this engine from these plans alone, no help, no shortcuts, then I'll know you're serious. I'll know you actually understand what you're asking for." Serena opened the binder. The pages were covered in complex equations, intricate diagrams, notations in 2 different handwritings. It was intimidating. It was overwhelming. It was exactly what she needed. "How long do I have?" she asked. "As long as it takes." Serena took the binder home. She cleared her schedule, canceled her meetings, and locked herself in her penthouse with the plan spread across her dining room table. She ordered parts, rented workspace, and began to build. It was harder than anything she'd ever done. The mathematics were brutal, the engineering principles foreign. She made mistakes, dozens of them, each one requiring her to start over. Her hands, used to signing documents and shaking hands at board meetings, blistered from working with tools. She slept in her workshop, ate takeout cold from the container, and lost track of days. But slowly, component by component, the engine began to take shape. She learned the language Sarah and Henry had created, the shorthand they'd developed, the logic that connected each part to the whole. She began to understand not just how the engine worked, but why they'd designed it that way, the philosophy behind each choice. 6 weeks later, she drove back to Phoenix Dynamics. The engine, assembled and mounted on a test frame, sat in the trunk of her car. She carried it inside, her arms shaking from exhaustion, and placed it on Henry's workbench. "I finished it," she said. Henry examined the engine carefully. He checked every connection, every circuit, every seal. Then he connected it to a diagnostic system and powered it up. The engine started smoothly. The regenerative loop engaged. Energy cycled through the system, self-sustaining, exactly as designed. It ran for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20, without faltering. Henry shut it down and looked at Serena. For the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. "You did it," he said softly. Serena felt something break open inside her chest. She hadn't realized how badly she needed his approval until that moment. "Does this mean you'll let me help?" she asked. Henry nodded slowly. "It means I'll let you try." 3 months later, Serena called a press conference. The automotive journalists and industry analysts filled the rented hall, curious about what Whitmore Motors' embattled CEO might announce. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Some said she was stepping down. Others predicted a merger or a buyout. Serena stood at the podium in a simple black suit, her blonde hair pulled back. No jewelry except her wedding ring from a marriage that had ended years ago. She looked different. Older, maybe, or just more real. 15 years ago, she began, her voice steady, my father's company stole intellectual property from a brilliant engineer named Henry Dalton. The patents we took formed the foundation of much of our success in regenerative engine technology. We buried the theft under legal paperwork and silence. And when Henry tried to fight back, we crushed him. The room erupted in whispers and camera clicks. Serena waited for silence. I didn't know about this until recently. But ignorance isn't an excuse. I've spent the last several months coming to terms with the fact that everything I built was built on theft and cruelty. So today, I'm here to announce several things. She took a breath. First, I'm stepping down as CEO of Whitmore Motors, effective immediately. Second, I'm transferring my majority stake in the company to an independent ethics board that will oversee reparations to Mr. Dalton and reform of our patent practices. Third, I'm investing my personal fortune into Phoenix Dynamics, the company Henry founded, not as an owner or executive, but as a silent partner whose only role is to provide resources. The questions came fast and loud. But Serena raised her hand. I'm not finished. Henry Dalton built something my father tried to destroy. He built something I tried to steal, but he kept it alive because he believed it could help people. I want the world to know that the Phoenix engine is real, it works, and it's going to change how we think about sustainable transportation. And I want everyone to know that it exists, despite people like me. Not because of us. She stepped away from the podium. Henry was waiting in the wings. Together, they walked out to the parking lot where the old Barracuda sat, its hood open, the Phoenix engine gleaming inside. This is what it was always about, Serena said to the cameras. Not profit. Not power. Just the belief that we could do better. Henry started the engine. It roared to life, that perfect harmonic sound filling the air. And for the first time in 15 years, the people watching understood what they were hearing. It wasn't just an engine. It was possibility. It was proof that good ideas survive, that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. 1 year later, the Barracuda sat in the Museum of American Innovation in Dearborn, Michigan. A bronze plaque beside it read, "This old car hid a new world inside." The Phoenix engine had gone into production. 12 automotive manufacturers had licensed the technology. The first generation of Phoenix-powered vehicles was rolling off assembly lines, cleaner and more efficient than anything that had come before. Environmental groups celebrated it as a breakthrough. Engineers studied it as a masterpiece of design. And somewhere, in the quiet of memory, Sarah Dalton's dream lived on. Serena and Henry stood side by side at the museum's opening ceremony. They weren't friends exactly. The wounds were too deep for that. But they were something else. Something harder to name. Partners in repair. Witnesses to each other's transformation. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Serena asked quietly, looking at the car. Henry was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I think she would." The museum lights caught the Barracuda's faded paint, turning copper to gold. And when Henry turned the key one last time for the gathered crowd, the engine sang. Not just with power or precision, but with something more human. Forgiveness. Second chances. The sound of people choosing to be better than they were. Serena listened to that sound and felt, for the first time in her life, like she'd actually earned something. Not success. Not wealth. But peace. The knowledge that she'd looked at her worst self and chosen to become someone different. The engine hummed, the crowd applauded, and in that moment, beneath the museum lights, beside a rusty car that had carried a fortune in its heart, two people who'd started as enemies found something unexpected. They found that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building something better from its pieces. It's about taking what was broken and making it run again, smoother and stronger than before. The ceremony ended. People filed out. But Serena and Henry stayed a while longer, looking at the car, listening to the engine's perfect song, and understanding finally what it meant to be transformed, not by success or failure, but by the simple, difficult choice to do right. By someone you've wronged. That night, as the museum closed and the lights dimmed, the Barracuda sat silent in its glass case. But the echo of its engine remained, a reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't always visible. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look past the rust and see the gold underneath. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who laugh at old cars and quiet janitors learn the hardest lesson of all. That worth isn't measured in shine or status. It's measured in what you build, what you protect, and what you're willing to sacrifice to make things right. The janitor had his justice. The CEO had her redemption. And the old car that everyone mocked became the machine that proved that every engine, every person, every broken thing has the potential to be reborn.